Hi everyone, welcome. I hope you're all doing well. Thanks for joining us for another lesson of our ongoing Spanish course. This lesson is on the very important Spanish verb comenzar. Comenzar. Comenzar is a stem changing verb. The E changes to an IE in some of the forms when you conjugate it in the present tense. So comenzar means to begin or to start. So let's talk about that first part of the title, the stem changing. Why do we call it a stem changing verb? Well, the AR is considered the ending of the infinitive, and the infinitive is just the form of the verb that's not conjugated. It doesn't have a subject, a person doing the action, or it doesn't have a time, past, present, or future. It's just the idea of the activity, so to speak. So comenzar, to begin or to start. So when you remove the AR, you're left with what we call the root. So this is the root of the verb. It's also called the stem of the verb. And this is the part that's going to change. That's why we call it a stem changing verb. Well, what do we mean by it changes? Well, when we put the verb in its present tense forms, in some of the forms, you are going to have the original stem with no change. In other forms, you're going to see the E changing to an IE, and this changes the sound. This is comenz, and this is comienz. So it affects the pronunciation as well. So how do we know what forms change? Well, it's basically learned through memorization and practice. Native speakers learn this through practice, so you can do the same. So let's practice. Let's first take a look at the forms, and then we'll practice a little bit with it. So the first one is yo comienzo, comienzo. So notice this does have the stem change, the E change to an IE here. Comienzo, comienzo. And comienzo, of course, means I begin or I start, or I am beginning or I am starting. It can also mean I do begin or I do start. The present tense in Spanish is very powerful. It has more than one meaning, just depending on the context. Okay, so the next form is the tu form. In some places, instead of tu, they use vos. So some places in the Spanish-speaking world, namely Argentina, instead of using tu, you'll use vos, and this is the informal use. So the tu form is comienzas, tu comienzas. What does tu comienzas mean? It means you begin, you do begin, or you are beginning, or you start, you do start, you are starting. So begin and start, it's really the same thing with this verb. Vos, if you're in Argentina, they'll tell you, no, we don't use tu, we use vos instead of tu. So what is the vos form of comenzar? It is comenzas, comenzas. And notice there's no stem change here. So comenzas. The stress is on the last syllable. Comenzas, comenzas. Vos comenzas. You begin, you start. Usted, él, or ella form. So these three subjects share the same form. So the form would be comienza. And again, you see the stem change, comienza. So I would say, usted comienza, you begin, you start. Él comienza, he begins, he starts. Ella comienza, she begins or she starts. Nosotros comenzamos, comenzamos, we begin or we start. Notice there's no stem change for the nosotros form. Comenzamos, comenzamos. And the subject here can also be nosotras. Vosotros or vosotras. What is the form? The form is comenzáis, comenzáis. And the vosotros form is used in Spain, and they wouldn't pronounce it comenzáis. Most Spanish speakers would pronounce it comenzáis, comenzáis. So different pronunciation in Spain for the Z sound. In Latin America, it's like an S sound, but in Spain, comenzáis, thais. Ustedes, ellos, ellas, they all share the same form, and that is comienzan, comienzan. So, ustedes comienzan, you begin. Remember, this is the plural you. You're addressing more than one person. You begin, ustedes comienzan. They begin, ellos comienzan, or ellas comienzan. Also, they begin, just referring only to females. Okay, so here are the forms. Comienzo, comienzas, comenzás, comienza, comenzamos, comenzáis or comenzáis, comienzan, comienzan. Once you've memorized these forms here, something very exciting is about to happen. I know memorization is not exciting. I don't like the thought of having to memorize. But when you do memorize this verb, when you know how to come up with each of the forms in your mind, then something very exciting is about to happen. You're about to be able to use this verb to begin communicating with it. So are you ready for the fun part? Let's start communicating in Spanish. Let's start talking in Spanish with this verb. Okay, so I have different elements here. I have the part that you just learned, the different forms of the verb in the present tense. And remember that each form can have more than one meaning, just depending on context. So comienzo can mean I begin, I do begin, or I am beginning. Remember, comenzar means to begin or to start. So this can also mean I start, I do start, or I am starting. So the next piece is a little bit of vocabulary to put the verb into context. So el trabajo, the work. So you can say something like I begin the work or I start the work. El proyecto, the project. I begin the project or I start the project. And the last one here, if you want to say I begin studying or I start studying, it would be comienzo a estudiar. There's an expression, comenzar. You have to have the word a and then an infinitive, and it means to begin doing something. So comienzo a estudiar, I begin studying. Okay, and we also have hoy, today, and mañana, tomorrow. So to talk about when you begin something. So we can put all of these pieces together to create a whole bunch of different ideas. So this should show you the potential of what you can do with just learning one verb and knowing a little bit of vocabulary. So let's look at some examples here. This is the fun part. I will show you a bunch of examples now. So if I want to say I begin the work or I start the work, I would say comienzo el trabajo. I start the work today. Comienzo el trabajo hoy. I start the work tomorrow. Comienzo el trabajo mañana. I start the project. Comienzo el proyecto. I start the project today. Comienzo el proyecto hoy. I start the project tomorrow. Comienzo el proyecto mañana. How about tú? You start. Tú comienzas. You start the work. Tú comienzas el trabajo. You start the project, tú comienzas el proyecto. You start studying, tú comienzas a estudiar. If I want to say you start the work today, tú comienzas el trabajo hoy. You start the work tomorrow, tú comienzas el trabajo mañana. You start the project today, tú comienzas el proyecto hoy. You start the project tomorrow, tú comienzas el proyecto mañana. You start studying. Tú comienzas a estudiar. You start studying today. Tú comienzas a estudiar hoy. You start studying tomorrow. Tú comienzas a estudiar mañana. So if you're still with us here at this point, I'm sure you see the potential now of all of the things that you can say with just one conjugated verb and a little bit of vocabulary. Let's just finish this off with just a few more random examples. If I want to say, let's make this a little quiz, see if you can figure it out from the information that's here. How would you say, he begins the project tomorrow? He begins the project tomorrow. You might pause the video if you want a little time to think about it. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you the answer. He begins the project tomorrow would be this form here. Remember, usted, él, or ella share the same form. So he begins would be él comienza. Él comienza el proyecto mañana. Él comienza el proyecto mañana. He begins the project tomorrow. Él comienza el proyecto mañana. How would you say, we begin studying today? We begin studying today. Pause the video if you want a second to think about it. So the answer, we begin studying today, would be comenzamos a estudiar hoy. Comenzamos a estudiar hoy. we begin studying today. So let's finish this with a question. How would you ask someone informally, using the tú form, somebody that you're familiar with, how would you ask that person, do you begin the project today? Do you begin the project today? Pause the video if you want a second to think about it. So the answer, do you begin the project today, would be ¿Comienzas el proyecto hoy? ¿Comienzas el proyecto hoy? Do you begin the project today? Well, I hope you're excited about the potential here, all of the different things that you can do with just this one new verb. The work that you have to do is just to force yourself to look at this information and go through all of the possibilities in your mind, practice saying them out loud. That's the work. If you do that, then you're more likely to remember this verb and then, of course, to be able to use it when you need to use it in conversation. Okay, so let's finish off this lesson with just a couple more examples. We often use this verb comenzar with the question word when to ask when something begins. So here's one example. When does the class start? So we start off with cuando. So the verb would be comienza. So literally when begins, and then we end it with the class. So the question, when does the class start, in Spanish would be cuando comienza la clase. Cuando comienza la clase. We use comenzar to ask when an event is beginning. You could say, for example, when does the concert start? Cuando comienza el concierto? When does the class start? Cuando comienza la clase? When does the lesson start? Cuando comienza la lección? So we can answer this question by saying the class starts today. So this is the final test here. If you learn the verb, you should be able to say this. So literally the class starts today. We start with the class, which would be la clase. It starts, or it begins. Comienza. And then today, hoy. And there you have it. Okay, well, that's it for this lesson. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, I would appreciate it very much if you'd give it a like. To continue learning Spanish and go on to another lesson, click on the video that appears here on your screen. And I'll see you soon. Hasta pronto.